The Soviet of Ministers of the USSR, State Committee for the State of Emergency, date April 12, 2024. Decree. The Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, represented by the State Committee for the State of Emergency in the USSR as the Supreme State Authority of the USSR, expresses its respect and wishes for peace and creation to all the great, united, sovereign Soviet people, all subjects of law, and the entire world community. We hereby inform you that according to confirmed data from Soviet intelligence during the work in the Pseudo-Ministry of International Affairs of the Russian Federation, Russia Company, during the period of lifting the visa regime with Israel under the leadership of radical Zionism, the radical terrorist organizations Mossad and Chabad Lubavitch, together with the Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation and Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Russian Federation, Mikhail Igorovich Sukhodolsky and other enemies of our motherland, to the territory of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, namely in the USSR, 50,000 Russian-speaking saboteurs were transferred, trained by the enemies of our country, of Slavic appearance, who were sent to the security bloc. The Ministry of Internal Affairs, the internal troops, with further distribution to the senior executive level as the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, currently the Soviet State Cooperative Enterprise Russian Federation Russia. Exactly the same situation under the Houston Project was carried out on the sovereign territory of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, in the Ukrainian USSR, with a similar number of saboteurs and the further distribution to all structures and departments of the foreign commercial company Ukraine, which is not the legal successor to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic as a part of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, on the basis of Legal Act No. 7 of July 11, 2023. The State Emergency Committee of the USSR, as the supreme body of state power of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, was declared invalid, illegal, fraudulent, unlawful, criminal and terrorist entity. An attempt to implement the Houston Project by the enemies of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, as the Great Sovereign Multinational Soviet people from the outside radical Zionism, Anglo-Saxons, and other prohibited fascist and neo-fascist countries, the GCUs, the Vatican, and various corporations and organizations, in violation of the Nuremberg Tribunal, certifies the fact that the temporarily created conglomerate of the financial corporation of the trading company Israel was created within the New World Order Trust with the non-reincorporation term until 2016 and was registered as its subsidiary trading company as a corporate trust and statutory jurisdiction, ceasing to exist in 2016 as a form of management of a crown corporation for a term of 72 years and an administrative term of 3 years, consisting of control of radical Zionism, Jewish trading agents, banking houses, directories, companies, colonies, trading posts, private founders and pseudo-owners of central banks, as led by the Chabadnik world corporate government and openly controlled by agents of influence through penetration into the sovereign territory of the USSR, in USSR, Ukrainian USSR, and other Soviet republics of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, foreign sabotage agents through the Mossad, Tzahal, Beitar, As-Salam, the military rabbinate, and other radical terrorist organizations through an armed coup in the USSR. We remind you that in the Sovereign Union, such a religion as Judaism was brutally eradicated and was banned, due to the fact that very ideology of this confession manifests radical Zionism, implies the superiority of one nation over another, and fosters fascism. According to the sovereign legislation of the USSR, as well as the corporate laws of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, currently the Soviet State Cooperative Enterprise Russian Federation Russia, private military companies are prohibited. In connection with the implementation within Soviet Union of an organized military conflict by pseudo-opposing terrorist parties represented by High Military Command of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, under the leadership of pseudo-president Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, and the highest military command under the leadership of Vladimir Zelensky, the prohibited terrorist company, the Ukraine UNA UPR, as a closed and prohibited project of the new Khazarian as the new Zionist prohibited state of Ukraine, Heavenly Jerusalem, providing for the extermination of more than 23 million Soviet sovereign citizens of the USSR, are recognized as war crimes, bloody and murderous acts against their own people on the sovereign territory of the USSR, in the USSR and the Ukrainian USSR, referred to in international criminal law as genocide. The State Emergency Committee of the USSR, as the supreme body of state power of the great sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, notifies the International Criminal Courts, arbitration, and the Military and International Criminal Tribunal that the conclusion of a contract of military service in the false armed forces of the Russian Federation Russia or volunteer military formations is a proven legal fact of mercenarism and violation by the former trading company Russian Federation Russia of the provisions of the International Convention against the recruitment, use, illegal financing, and trading of mercenaries, adopted by Resolution No. 4434 of the General Assembly of December 4, 1989. Thus, the decree of the fictitious president of the former trading company, Russian Federation Russia, currently the Soviet State Cooperative Enterprise, Russian Federation Russia, dated the 4th of January 2024, number 10, on the administration to citizenship of the Russian Federation of foreign citizens who have entered into a contract, not it has legal strength and the right of application in the sovereign territory of the USSR. State Emergency Committee, as the supreme body of state power of the great sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and its Extraordinary Constitution Committee of the USSR for constitutional supervision of the special presence within the framework of international justice, as the final plenary session proceeds from the fact that today, criminal, inhuman, and prohibited in the entire world space, the fascist, terrorist, extremist, separatist body of the Third Reich, having seized power in the sovereign territory of the USSR in the RSFSR and the Ukrainian SSR, represented by the former foreign trade company Russian Federation Russia, together with radical Zionism and banned terrorist company Ukraine, UNA, and now the private military campaign Israel Defense Forces as the armed forces of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, unleashed an armed conflict requiring international intervention and condemnation of Israel as an aggressor, falling under the scope of the UN General Assembly Resolution of 14 December 1974, number 3314, definition of aggression, as those who committed aggression against the sovereign people of the winner in the Great Patriotic War, 1941-1945, as the sovereign territory of the USSR, used and prohibited by the sovereign legislation of the USSR, the RSFSR, the Nuremberg trials, as well as the corporate laws of the Russian Federation, symbols in the form of the Latin letters Z and V, used in the Third Reich as Wehrmacht and Sonder, which were used during the Second World War in the form of symbols of various units of the SS, Wehrmacht, Luftwaffe, and Kriegsmarine. The use of such symbols is a desecration of the blessed memory and honor of the great, sovereign, multinational Soviet people and our ancestors who won the great victory over fascism. According to the federal law of the Russian Federation, the armed forces of the Russian Federation cannot have a regular strength. The establishment of a regular strength of the armed forces of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia didn't happen and didn't take place on the basis of the decree of the false president of the Russian Federation dated on the 12th of January, number 915, on establishment the staffing level of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, recognized as cancelled, insignificant, not former counterfeit act and excluding allocation Ministry Defense ex-trade company Russian Federation Russia, budget funds, and the legal fact that the decree of the president of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia dated August 16, 2004, number 1082, on issues of the military defense of the Russian Federation couldn't be received as void and invalid, not properly published in the official press and having no force and enforcement in the USSR, due to the fact that the mercenary armed forces of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, even according to the corporate law of the Russian Federation, couldn't be created according to the private federal law, since such a private law was withdrawn from the consideration and withdrawn by the initiator of the legislative initiative, which entails the recognition of the mercenary armed forces of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia as non-existent, and the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation is not created, instead of which a non-state institution operates, such as a foreign agent and a foreign private military companies, whose activities are SIC 9711, U.S. National Security, and has, according to the non-prohibited Admiralty Law, commercial registration DUNS 363-44-7708. According to the constitutional provision enshrined in Article 15 of the Constitution of the Russian Federation, laws and other normative legal acts affecting the rights, freedoms, and responsibilities of a man and citizen are subject to official publication. The procedure for official publication is established by federal law dated June 14, 1994. Number 5 FZ on the procedure for publication and entry into the force of federal constitutional laws. Federal laws act as the chambers of the Federal Assembly. In accordance with the part of the Articles of Force of this federal law, the official publication of the federal constitutional law, federal law, is considered the first publication of its full text in the Parliamentary Gazette, Российская газета, collection of legislation of the Russian Federation, or the first placement, publication, on the official internet portal of legal information, www.pravo.gov.ru. Regulatory legal acts are the federal bodies of the executive branch that haven't undergone state registration and are not published in the prescribed manner, do not entail legal consequences as they have not entered into the force, and cannot serve as a basis for regulating relevant legal relations, applying sanctions to citizens, officials, and organizations for failure to comply with the instructions contained therein. According to the private federal law number 61 FZ of the 31st of May 1996 on defense, the legitimate president of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia lost in 2004 pseudo rights and powers to enact wartime regulations and terminate their validity where executive authorities are abolished for the period of wartime in accordance with the private constitutional law on martial law. State Emergency Committee of the USSR, as the supreme body of state power of the great sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and its extraordinary Constitutional Committee of the USSR for constitutional supervision, established the fact that historically tricolor banners are trade symbols of Khazaria, that is, they are used by trading corporations, under one of which conducted his criminal, anti-state, anti-people on the side of the Third Reich, world fascism, Andrei Andreevich Vlasov, head of the fascist organization, Russian Liberation Army, as one of the largest armed formations created by the leadership of Nazi Germany, from among the Soviet prisoners of war who betrayed their oaths as part of the Wehrmacht in 1942-1944, formed by various German military structures during the Second World War, used by the Dark Khazaria, at the expense of which the entire fascist anti-human ideology was built. The private federal constitutional law of December 25, 2000, number 1 FKZ on the state flag of the Russian Federation, even under the corporate law of the Russian Federation, didn't go through the second reading procedure, wasn't approved by the fictitious State Duma of the Russian Federation, and was falsified by the President Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin as an Asian constitutional law which in 1997-1999 was rejected as uncreated and non-registered by draft law number 97-765-3 and draft law number 97-80-3381, after which the existence of the flag of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, its demonstration, and also the coat of arms of the Russian Federation as an aggressive heraldry in relation to the Russian kingdom of the Roman Empire, where there is no territory and people inhabiting it, is obviously illegal, falsified, forged, and prohibited. The great sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, according to the Soviet legislation of the USSR, has great, glorious state symbols in the form of the state flag of the USSR, the coat of arms of the USSR, and the anthem of the USSR. In all its subjects of law, the Soviet republics, there is a valid symbolism approved by the sovereign legislation of the USSR in the form of the state flag and the coat of arms of the republics. The military commissariats of the Russian Federation are in similar position, which are uncreated legal entities that cannot be registered and recognized in Russia on the basis that private military companies represented by legal entities are prohibited by the sovereign legislation of the USSR, as well as by the corporate law of the Russian Federation, and are recognized as the legal military formations carrying out their criminal activities on the sovereign territory of the great sovereign country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The regulation of military commissariats, approved by the decree of the former pseudo-president of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, dated December 7, 2012, number 1609 on approval of the regulation on military commissariats, is unimproved, invalid, and is void as of June 7, 2012. In the Russian Federation, due to the fact that the falsified decree wasn't published in the official press, didn't come into force and came into effect, which is confirmed by registration number P20 12-07-028, dated December 7, 2012, where also the military, who through fraudulent actions received a dubious legal status persons in the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, on the basis of the insignificant decree of the private digital government of the Russian Federation, dated August 19, 1994, number 979, on approval of the regulations on military commissariats, which by decree of the private digital government of the Russian Federation dated January 14, 2000, number 34, on invalidation of the resolutions of the private government of the Russian Federation dated August 19, 1994, number 979, and June 6, 1996, number 649, was cancelled and declared invalid, as evidenced by registration number P250-179, dated January 14, 2000, as a valid and regulatory act as a registration. Further, the false decree of the former president of the former trading company of the Russian Federation dated October 15, 1999, number 1372, on approval of the regulations on military commissariats, became invalid, according to the decree of the same former person, replacing the President of the Russian Federation, dated December 1, 2007, number 1132, after which the conscription of citizens of the Russian Federation and sovereign citizens of the USSR for military service is illegal, unlawful and criminal due to its legal inconsistency and falsified criminal content, as well as the cancellation and loss of force according to the decree of the former false president of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, dated December 7, 2012, number 1609, adopted as temporary and valid for only 180 days. The fictitious military commissariats of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia do not have the rights, mandates, licenses, and powers to carry out and maintain military records of citizens of the USSR. Deceived and missold pseudo-citizens of the Russian Federation, who according to falsified documents, consider themselves such to carry out conscription and mobilization for service in false armed formations of the Russian Federation. No one in the former trading company Russian Federation Russia can appoint military commissars or present themselves as a military commissar in the Russian Federation, except the military commissars of the great country of the sovereign, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Based on the federal law of May 27, 1998, number 76 FZ, on the status of military personnel, since its draft law number 96, 700, 504, 2 is considered not adopted by the State Duma of the Russian Federation and not approved by the Federal Council of the Russian Federation, due to the lack of publication of voter resolutions chambers of the Federal Assembly of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, in the collection of the statutory legislation of the Russian Federation, and which is declared as twice rejected and subject to removal from consideration, as the private law itself is completely falsified and fabricated by the former president of the former trading company, Russian Federation Russia, which as invalid and void was not published in the official press as having entered into the force and legal effect, after which in the former trading company, Russian Federation Russia, de jure there is no military personnel or equivalent persons to them as persons undergoing military service under contract. In all the agendas of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, currently the Soviet state cooperative enterprise of the Russian Federation Russia, on behalf of insignificant military commissariats, are forged, invalid, illegal and criminal, and are offered to participate in a private military campaign, acting in foreign interests as mercenaries and doesn't give rise to the law, in case of refusal to accept any responsibility, since in private federal law of March 28, 1998, number 53 FZ on military duty and military service is indicated in summonses without a number and date of adoption, on the basis that this private law was considered in violation of the regulations, the second reading of which is issued for the procedure for conducting its third reading, as evidenced and confirmed by the resolutions of the pseudo-state Duma of the Federal Assembly. The former trading company Russian Federation Russia, dated December 10, 1997, number 1675, the second, State Duma, on the federal law, on military duty and military service, and the forged resolution of the Council of Federal Assembly of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, dated December 24, 1997, number 301 SF, on the federal law on military duty and military service, and the forged resolution of the Council of the Federal Assembly of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, dated December 24, 1997, number 301 SF, of the federal law on the military duty and military service is invalid, since it wasn't published in the official press, then signed on October 8, 1997 as a bill, rather than enacted private federal law that wasn't properly published in established deadlines in the official press, are thereby invalid and void. In such circumstances, all kinds of orders and other command and administrative acts of false military commissars who are not in military service in the USSR, have no legal force and do not entail legal consequences of the recipient's subpoenas and orders. Article 62 of the USSR Constitution states, a citizen of the USSR is obliged to protect the interests of the Soviet state, to contribute to the strengthening of its power and sovereignty. The defense of the socialist fatherland is a sacred duty of every citizen of the USSR. Treason to the motherland is the gravest crime against the people. Military service in the ranks of the armed forces of the USSR is an honorable duty of Soviet citizens, which establishes the obligation of conscription service in the ranks of the armed forces of the USSR and for citizens of the USSR upon conscription and mobilization. Military certificates are opened without signing a military contract service. Criminal activities of the command center of the armed forces of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, under the leadership of traitors and traitors to the motherland, Shoigu Sergei Kuzhegetovich, Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, Gerasimov Valery Vasilyevich, First Deputy Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, uncreated according to the private federal law of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, which are not such on the basis that the false decrees of the pseudo-president of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, number 31, of the 21st of January 2020, on the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, number R 202-4072, dated January 21st, 2020, and Decree number 1505, dated November 9th, 2020, on the Chief of the General Staff of the Russian Federation, registration number P20-120-60-73, dated November 9th, 2012, didn't enter into legal force, and as regulations were not published in the official press, led to the deliberate theft of special radio-electronic air defense equipment on the borders of the Bryansk, Kursk, Belgorod regions, Yeysk district of the Krasnodar territory, which allowed terrorists to freely attack civilians in populated areas and led to the terrible destruction and death of civilians, including children. Sergei Shoigu and Valery Gerasimov are not appointed to the position of Minister and First Deputy of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, but are self-employed individuals who have a genomic identity with genetically modified organisms conducting business activities. Hereby proclaims the State Service of the Anti-Terrorism Union of the State Security Committee of the USSR, the main directorate of the counterintelligence SMERSH, immediately begin an operation to identify enemies and foreign sabotage agents involved in the above crimes on the sovereign territory of the USSR, with the aim of arresting them and executing punishment for committed criminal acts, for which the sovereign legislation of the USSR provides for capital punishment. To all military formations, military personnel who are fraudulently missold, considering themselves pseudo-citizens of the Russian Federation, virtual individuals who voluntarily entered into contract with the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, taking part in the so-called special military operation on the sovereign territory of the Great Sovereign Country, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, on the Russian side, as well as military personnel with pseudo-Ukrainian citizenship, participating as opposing side in this military conflict, mobilized or entering into a contract with the so-called armed forces of Ukraine, and in fact with the former company UNR, currently a banned terrorist organization, in the sovereign territory of the USSR and throughout the world, must by order transfer to serve in the armed forces of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, otherwise they are subject to recognition as foreign saboteurs, terrorists and members of bandit formations caught with weapons in their hands while committing crimes against sovereign citizens of the USSR and are subject to criminal liability for military crime committed in wartime. The State Emergency Committee of the USSR, as the supreme body of state power of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, orders as soon as possible the above-mentioned parliamentary formations to raise and install the state red flag of the USSR, which is the only legal and valid state flag in the entire sovereign territory of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. As a sign of the establishment of peace, spiritual religious unity in the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics from the two main historical directions of religion, like ancient Vedic Christianity and Islam, together with the state Soviet red flag, raised the battle flag of the Russian army with the image of icon of the Savior, not made by hands, with the face of the one prophet, as the Son of God, Radomir Isa, also called Jesus Christ. All citizens of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, by birth and those liable for military service of the USSR, who took the military oath of the USSR, are serving and entered into contract with the false Ministry of Defense of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, bear special criminal liability in the military tribunal of the USSR as for committed military, state, and international criminal offenses in wartime. The entire fictitious military political leadership of the organized military conflict on the sovereign territory of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, in the Ukrainian SSR and the RSFSR, from both opposing sides is recognized as terrorists, separatists, and extremists with all the ensuing consequences, the purpose of which is the implementation of the Houston Project of genocide and the destruction of the sovereign Soviet people and the dismemberment of the sovereign territory of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, under the Zionists, neo-fascist prohibited corporations, BlackRock, Shell, Chevron, and other prohibited terrorist corporations and organizations under the criminal control of a terrorist, extremist, separatist religious mystical occult movement Kabbalah as the fact of a sabotage and treason. All the so-called forces represented by the uncreated and fraudulent Ministry of Defense of the former trading company Russian Federation Russia, private mercenary military companies, accomplices and perpetrators of the planned criminal genocide as a terrorist, separatist, extremist act on the sovereign territory of the USSR in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, RSFSR, and other eternal territories of the USSR, the so-called mercenary formations of the Ministry of Defense of the illegitimate, prohibited foreign trading company Ukraine on the territory of the USSR in the Ukrainian SSR, private military companies participating in the artificially created military conflict, with the exception of foreign mercenaries based on indigenous residents and those born in the territory USSR or by birth of parents on the territory of the USSR, become subordinate to the State Committee for the State Emergency of the USSR as the supreme body of state power of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, as the Extraordinary Defense Commission of the Council of People's Commissars of the USSR under the State Committee for the State of Emergency and the officially recognized Soviet Red Army. In case of disobedience and opposition to the legitimate demands of the State Committee for the State of Emergency of the USSR as the supreme body of state power of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, as well as the Commission of War Crimes against Sovereign Citizens of the USSR, such crimes are considered by the military field extraordinary tribunals as confirmation on their belonging to persons convinced of committing state and military international crimes on the sovereign territory of the USSR as responsible and guilty, persons subject to punishment according to the sovereign decree as the Presidium of the USSR Armed Forces No. 39, dated April 19, 1943, on punishment measures of non-civilians guilty of murder and torture of the Soviet civilian population and captured Red Army soldiers for spies traitors to the motherland from among Soviet citizens and for their accomplices. The State Emergency Committee of the USSR as the supreme body of state power of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and its Extraordinary Constitutional Committee of the USSR notify interested persons who call themselves pseudo-citizens of the Russian Federation, leaders as their replacements, that those who are not created and authenticated by the legal and duly military commissariats as the Russian Federation do not have state registration as territorial bodies, and their legal mobilization points and non-state institutions that record mercenaries as persons serving under contract in foreign armies and military companies. Thus, service entry and competition of military service under a contract in the former trading company Russian Federation Russia executed to an employment contract or contract with a foreign resident as is recognized as a criminal offense which entails criminal liability under the sovereign legislation of the USSR in wartime. This decree has the status of an absolute sovereign legal legislative act and is subject to full mandatory execution throughout the entire sovereign territory of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and through the entire world. In the event that any subject of law and any subject ignores this decree of the State Committee for the State of Emergency of the USSR as the highest state authority of the Great Sovereign Country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, this subject of law is recognized as criminal, belongs to the category of separatists and international terrorists. This decree comes into legal force from the moment of its signing. Chairman of the Presidium, CPC, USSR, and State Defense Committee, General Secretary, Chairman of the Presidium, CSC of the USSR, Army General, Bissutushev, Commissar of the State Emergency Committee of the USSR, Lieutenant General A. Chernomorov, Secretariats of the State Emergency Committee of the USSR, Major General Irina Gorbacheva.